Hello and welcome back. Hey, so I am here today, actually this morning, this is a cold December morning on a Sunday, at a place, or at the memorial for Fort McCord. Fort McCord, this memorial is actually located it's on Rumler Rd, not all that far from Edenville, Pennsylvania. Now, this monument, it commemorates a very important event in history that's kind of lost and nobody really knows a whole lot about it. And actually the records are kind of lost too. There's not a whole lot left. And there's only one really good record that exists explaining the whole event and the events that followed. And it was done by a woman named Jean Lowry, and it was actually lost to history for pretty much 200 years. But I'm trying to bring that back to life for you so you understand what happened here and give you a good example of on the frontier what occurs when it is abandoned during an Indian war. So to recap, based off of one of my previous videos on the beginning of the French and Indian War. July 9th, 1755, there was a force of 1,500 men that was commanded by British General Edward Braddock. Their job was to throw the French out of the Ohio country because they were moving in onto the Ohio territory in which the British and the Virginians said that they controlled. Good old Braddock, he got defeated and he lost badly, killing or wounding 60% of his force. He was killed in the process. His second in command was killed, and Colonel Thomas Dunbar had to take command of the forces. They retreated eventually to Pauling's Tavern, located south of Greencastle, Pennsylvania, and then eventually made winter quarters in mid to late August in Philadelphia, completely abandoning the frontier to Indian raids and attacks. Because of that, there was no force here to defend these people except for their own personal militias and the provincial forces that only had a fort at Fort Lyttelton just over the mountain here. So they wound up having to build private forts for themselves. And they would take houses, private houses, and then they would convert them into strongholds in order to protect their community and their families. And that is what Fort McCord was. It was built by John and William McCord out of William McCord's home. It was a log structure, and it would have set somewhere in that field over about in there. And unfortunately, it was attacked eventually. But anyway, these forts were created. There's forts everywhere around here named after the families that created them. Fort David Davis, Fort Philip Davis, Fort Wydell, Fort McDowell, Fort McCord, Fort Chambers. And they were all private forts to protect their families and, of course, their neighbors from Indian attacks and French incursions if they came. After Dunbar retreated in the fall of 1755, you started to see Indian attacks in the area, specifically in the Great Cove, which is now modern-day Fulton County, Pennsylvania. Those attacks resulted in a lot of death of men, women, and children, and also captives as well. They were burning houses, burning farms, killing livestock, killing people. It was terrible. I mean, it was devastating to this area. And two war chiefs that were famous around here, they both were Lenape, or Delaware Indians. One was Shingus, sometimes referred to as Shingus the Terrible by the local people, and also a man named Captain Jacobs. That was his English name, Captain Jacobs. And they would lead raiding parties in here and terrorize the people in the fall, in the winter, and in the spring, 1755 and 1756. Now we're going to fast forward to the events at Fort McCord. In late March of 1756, you had two Indian raiding parties move into the area. One was commanded by Shingus, who was a Lenape war chief, of course, and he was commanding roughly around 50 men. They are the ones that came over the mountain, and they came, and then they are the ones who besieged and attacked Fort McCord. The other party at the time was commanded by another Lenape, which is Captain Jacobs. Captain Jacobs was over in the Great Cove, modern-day Fulton County, terrorizing the people there. During the day, or in the morning, the women and the children of the local people and of the McCord family all huddled in the fort that used to sit over here. Now the men, because they were getting ready for planting, and they had to go work in the fields. They all left to go work in the fields and left the women and children, except for the one man, and his name was Jean Lowry. Jean Lowry was the sole male defender of Fort McCord. His wife, Jean Lowry, they both had 6 children. Now, John Jr. was the oldest, and he was in the fields helping his relatives. The other 5 children, whose names were Mary, James, Elizabeth, Jane, and Sarah, all ranging anywhere between 8 and 2 years old, were with their parents at the fort. And Jean Lowry was also there. Jean was 6 months pregnant. The attack that actually occurred at 1 o'clock on April the 1st, 1756, according to Jean Lowry's own words. She was upstairs in the loft where most of the women and children were hiding, and she had 3 of her children. Now, the 2 oldest children that were present, which were Mary and James, they were downstairs with their father. And their father, being the sole defender, of course, was shooting at the attacking Indians as they were coming towards the fort. He managed to kill 1 Indian, and then they killed him. So John Lowry, he was now dead, the only male defender of this fort. And unfortunately, the Indians came into the fort, and they removed all the people in the second floor, or in the first floor at the bottom, and they captured them. So after that, then arrows were then fired into through the windows of the loft, and according to Jean's own words, it wounded several. After the Indians were firing the arrows into the upper stories of Fort McCord, and again wounding some, then they set the house on fire. By this time, I imagine, under circumstances, that some of the people inside actually did escape and make it outside while the fort was burning, but not Jean Lowry. Jean Lowry was hoping that if she stayed quiet long enough with her 3 children that she still had, again, 2 of her children were downstairs and they were captured, but with the 3 children that she had in her arms, she was determined to stay up in the loft as long as possible because she was afraid of the Indians. She even says in her narrative that she was so scared because she was pregnant at the time, and again, 6 months pregnant, and she was afraid that if the Indians knew that, they would kill her right off the bat, which the Indians they usually did, because most of the time pregnant women didn't make very good captives. They were slow, they were unable to walk, and the Indians needed them to move fast, and they needed them to move quick while they were escaping. So most of the time they never took pregnant women captive. Hardly ever did they take pregnant women captive, and if they did, they usually wound up dead when they couldn't keep up when they tried to escape the area. And knowing this, she figured that she'd rather perish in the flames than be killed by the Indians. But the problem was, in the words she said, she would suffer many deaths in one. Not only would she allow herself to die, all 3 of her children would perish to the flames as well, including the 4th child, which was the one inside her womb. So she stayed in as long as possible inside the loft of this burning cabin, or this burning fort, and it was getting to the point where she couldn't hardly breathe. The smoke was taking over her and her children, and then she finally decided, through the grace of God, because she was extremely religious, that she would finally give it up and asked the Indians to help her get out of the fort itself. So she throwed open the window, let in some fresh air, and she called down to the Indians to receive her children. So the Indians agreed to help Jean Lowry escape, and she eventually lured all 3 of her children down through the window into the arms of the very people who killed her husband. And then she eventually lured herself down, and when she did, she felt that the Indians realized what her condition was, that she was indeed 6 months pregnant, and they became very concerned with this. And she did her best to conceal it, and she even says that most likely she probably did the ungodly thing and lied, and said said no. She can't necessarily remember, but she's probably pretty sure that she lied. So, being that said, she did the ungodly thing and lied, and to cover herself up. Now, they gather all the captives in front of the burning building, of course, and Fort McCord, again, like I said, it would be sitting over there somewhere, and it was on fire. And they gather all the captives. And Jean Lowry and no reports actually say what occurred here, but most likely the Indians were doing an evaluation of their prisoners, seeing who they think can move and who they think they can't. And by doing so, they want to make sure that they can escape quickly. Anybody who was wounded, of course, would most likely be killed. And she said that some was wounded in the attack with the arrows. They took a young woman who was a mother, pregnant at the time, and most likely wounded in some way, shape, or form. They killed her, scalped her, and took her baby out of her and scalped the child. On top of that, they most likely killed several others, because Jean Lowry said there was 27 in the fort, but by the time they made it over the mountain, there were only 21. So somewhere along the line, a total of 6 was killed. One being John Lowry, the other one being this unborn child, the mother, and then later on we know of a confirmed case of a little girl being killed at a place very close from here, which I will show you next. But before we leave this spot, I want to zoom in here on the monument itself and show you that. So here's the monument. So now I'm at the intersection of Fort McCord Rd and Gilbert Rd, located very near to Edenville, Pennsylvania. And this here is actually the beginning of what's called Yankee Gap. So this road, Gilbert Rd, actually goes through Yankee Gap over the mountain to Bear Valley. This is where the Indians, after they captured the prisoners, Jean Lowry, her 5 children, Ann McCord, Mary McCord, Mrs. John Thorne, several kids. Martha Thorne was a 7-year-old kid or girl. They marched them up through here. Now, the only thing that marks this place is actually a little monument for Mary Jemison, who was another Indian captive who was taken through Yankee Gap about 2 years later after Jean Lowry and attack of Fort McCord. That would have been in 1758. And the marker is right here, and that's commemorating Mary Jemison. But in our story, in 1756, this gap, Yankee Gap, was where they took Jean Lowry and the captives of Fort McCord. There was a little girl that was mentioned in the Maryland Gazette who was found killed and scalped. She is unnamed, but she was found at a base of an adjacent mountain. Most likely she was killed in this gap by the Indians because she was either suffering from wounds that she sustained during the attack of Fort McCord, or she was unable to keep up with the Indians' pace. When the Indians took captives, they usually ran for 24 hours to get out of Dodge. They wanted to get away from a possible incoming militia, which is what Shingus and his party was going to suffer if they didn't get out very soon, because there was a Captain Alexander Culbertson who organized the provincial forces and militia in in Chambersburg area, and he was moving to Fort McCord, and then he was going to track the Indians because they took captives. And he, after the Indians went through Yankee Gap, he also went through Yankee Gap after them. And you can still follow the trail that both the militia and the Indians followed up through the mountains, which is the exact same route that I'm going to take today. And I will explain to you how that works, and show you in case you wanted to drive that route yourself. That research was actually done by Mr. Hayes Eshelman, and he's the one to determine the route. As I drive along here, I'm actually now in Bear Valley. I just wanted to update you on Jean Lowry's progress as we drive. So what she was going through was, again, she was 6 months pregnant. She was marched over what she referred to as mountain and vale. So up and down as they were escaping, and they were, as I said, the Indians want to move fast. So they are actually encouraging them to move even faster. A lot of times they would whip the prisoners, including the children. And a lot of times they would take switches, and they would hit the children along the legs. Now, we don't know for certain, but knowing the feistiness of Jean Lowry, who was a fighting Presbyterian, she actually probably didn't take kindly to the Indians beating her children like that. So I have a sneaking suspicion that she probably got on the Indians' cases about it and fought back, which the Indians actually would have admired, because they like strongness in people. But the reason why I say she probably fought back was because she makes a comment when she does get to a place of rest where they sit, and they had a campfire and they were resting for the night. Her and her children were the only prisoners, according to her recollections, that were tied. So most likely she gave them a fit to the point that they were forced to bind her and tie her up for the night. So according to the rest of her journal, some of the feistiness that she has would support that conclusion. So I don't know for a fact if she fought back against them whipping the children, but she did say that they did whip the prisoners, and most likely she did get a little feisty with them. So in Jean Lowry's report, she says that the Indians traveled the night or the afternoon and the night of April 1st up and over mountains and down through vales. So over mountains and down vales. And that's how they traveled until they finally arrested very late in the evening, possibly in the morning of April 2nd. Hayes Eshelman, he was a local historian, and he actually traced out this path that they followed, roughly following modern-day roads. And I will put the directions for the modern road in the description below. And so if anybody wants to follow that, then the directions will be there to tell you how to follow the modern day road. But essentially, the Indians would have crossed, like Jean Lowry said, over mountain and down through valleys, and eventually reach a place that at that time and to this day today is known as Burnt Cabins, and it's known as Burnt Cabins, Pennsylvania today. Now from there, the Indians actually would have went a northwesterly direction to the rendezvous point, in which Shingus, who was in control of this force, was going to meet his friend Captain Jacobs and his band of Indians. They were going to rendezvous at modern-day Maddensville, Pennsylvania. but they followed the northwesterly route. Now, the militia did not. They actually went west down what is now modern US 522, or the Croghan Pike, and they went to Fort Lyttelton for reinforcements. And yet another mountain that we have to cross. Like I said, up over mountains and down through vales. Mountains and vales. That's what Jean Lowry said her march was. Remember, she was 6 months pregnant, herding 5 children, and in distress because her husband died, was killed. And on top of it, she had to follow an Indian who was carrying his rifle, her husband's rifle, and her husband's scalp. And she had to watch that the entire trip, up over valleys, or up over mountains, and down through valleys. So Shingus's forces with their prisoners from Fort McCord, they came to burnt cabins, and then they eventually took on more northwesterly route over to a rendezvous point in which they were supposed to meet up with the force from Captain Jacobs. Again, Shingus was about 50 men, and Captain Jacobs was about 50 men warriors at the time. And Captain Jacobs was in modern-day Fulton County, terrorizing everybody in the Great Cove. And the militia who was following Shingus, they tracked him the whole way over the mountains and vales of Jean Lowry. And then they came to burnt cabins, but then they broke off their pursuit and went west to Fort Lyttelton for reinforcements, which is where I am at now. This historic sign, and then there's also a monument over here. Somewhere around in here, along modern-day 522 in Fulton County, set Fort Lyttelton. It was a provincial fort. It's here where Captain Culbertson and his militia met with either a lieutenant or an ensign or a doctor, Jemison. Also Jemison. I've heard it pronounced both ways, and I've heard him have several different titles. So I'm not sure which one, but he, according to the monument at Fort McCord, he was Lieutenant Jemison. But anyway, here they met with Jemison, and they gathered up him and 19 provincial forces as reinforcements to attack the Indian force under Shingus and recover the prisoners. When the two forces met up here, they joined forces and now they're totaled around 51 total, including Captain Alexander Culbertson and Jemison himself. And they marched their force north to where they felt that they were going to run into this Indian force under Shingus. But it is here at Fort Lyttelton where they gathered those reinforcements and prepared to engage Shingus and his band of warriors, who captured currently has 21 prisoners under their care, and they were planning to assault this force with the 51 men under this militia. So from Fort Lyttelton, the militia then turned north up what is now modern-day Sinoquipe Rd, and followed the Little Aughwick Creek up the valley, where they found the Indians camped at a rendezvous point at Sideling Hill Creek in modern-day Maddensville, Pennsylvania, in Huntington County.